setting up stations in your special education classroom, it can feel very overwhelming. As teachers, we have to think about so many things, and so I've broken down these steps for you to be able to successfully set up stations in your special education class. So let's get started. What station should I set up, right? That's the biggest question in the room. Everybody's asking it. There are a few things to consider when deciding what types of stations that you should have in your classroom. You first should consider, what do you want the content to be? When do you want to have the stations? The amount of students that you have, the amount of paraprofessionals that you have available. All of these things factors will determine the types and numbers of stations that you do have. They're also called centers too. So when do you want to have your stations and what will you teach? Right? There's so many questions we have. So make sure to take time to look at your schedule to see what academic or non-academic time you want stations to happen. What is the function of it? Also a very big question. I have previously run leisure exploration stations where students could try out new toys or games, and I also use stations to teach core academic content too, so it could be both. So determine what is best for your learners. There's so many things to consider here. How many students will be available? How many paraprofessionals? Again, we know that's the elephant in the room sometimes, is staffing. And we all know that our students are in and out of the classroom all day long, between related service times, bathrooming, self-care, behaviors, regulation, and so many other reasons. So take a look at your schedule to determine when will you have the majority of your students available to do centers. It's hard to do 2 stations with 2 students. I've done it before, but it's hard to do. You also need to consider when your assistants will be available to help run the stations. So our aides break down, our aides need lunches and breaks too. So try to work around those times. If you do stations while a paraprofessional is on lunch, you may need to get creative. You can also use one assistant to monitor the independent workstations while you teach another station. See, there's so many options, or vice versa. Really be flexible with it. What types of stations can I have to set up? There's so many things here. You can do a teacher-led station where you do the main instruction. You can do paraprofessional-led station. This will be more of like a fluency station, IEP goal work, or a specialized target activity for each student when they come to them. Technology station can be used to practice previously taught skills, current content, or for a game or a reward, which is also really great. Hands-on learning. These can be work tasks, task boxes, file folders, adapted books, etc. that the student can start and stop independently with very little support. And possibly distant monitoring by you or an assistant might be helpful. So bonus, I have an idea here, peer interaction station. 2 students would need to be assigned to that station at a time, but you can use it to read to each other, do fluency with math, or engage socially through a gameplay. So again, there's options there too. So how do I teach my students about centers? It's really the big question, right? How do I teach my students? These students, this question is the one that I do get the most. And so typically I teach my paraprofessionals about how I expect stations to be run, and then my students kind of follow along. That's usually what happens. We start stations early in the school year as you are gaining that trust, and my assistants and students are in the honeymoon period, and it's still kind of fresh. We all know that honeymoon period with our students doesn't last long, so we really have to jump on the opportunity so that we can troubleshoot any situation that was going to come about. So let's talk about independent workstations. This is always where I start. The first opportunity I use to introduce stations is these independent working stations. I give my students tasks that I know that they can independently do. My assistants watch and take this time to teach my assistants how much support a student needs and the prompting hierarchy. This is always really important. I explicitly teach students and staff where to get the materials, the setup, how to complete the task, and how to put it away. If there are any other steps, such as raising your hand to check your work, I make sure that my classroom knows that as well. Again, just kind of part of the procedure thing. After a week of students understanding how to use those independent workstations, I start letting the students rotate to different tasks. I set a timer for 5 to 10 minutes, and when the timer goes off, they move to the next activity, whatever it is. It helps if there is some type of rewarding activity at one of the stations, such as Play-Doh, fidgets, iPad, and this kind of helps the students understand that basics of the rotating from one activity to another, and when the timer goes off. So I've seen it too, where the activity has moved to them, and that kind of helps too. So during that time, teachers and assistants are kind of working on overseeing all of the different groups of students and troubleshooting any issues. If students need one-on-one support, we let the assistant be the one that is with the student, but make sure that they aren't supporting too much. So no over-prompting. That's really kind of what we're looking for. Finally, use visuals. Make sure if students are rotating, they know what color, number, table, etc. they are going to. Try not to mix up the rotation too much and put them in a logical order. You don't want students crossing paths too much, or behaviors may occur. We all have seen that before. So use a circle rotation or a square type of rotation so students have a clear understanding of where they go. You can give students a transition card to show where they need to go and display their sequence on the board, or maybe use a paraprofessional to kind of direct traffic a little bit. As students get more comfortable, remove some of those supports so that it can be independent. It's kind of what the goal is, right? All right, number 2, paraprofessional led stations. This is what you can do once your students have a firm understanding of how to rotate. You can use this time to teach your assistants how to run a fluency or an IEP goal station where students can work with them. Yes, students are going to be doing their own independent work at this time, but you will train your assistants. I promise the pockets of time will go far. I know it's a lot to train your staff on the fly, but it'll help, I promise. So I have the majority of my students doing independent work, and then maybe I'll pull 2 or 3 students, the ones that need the most support, to help train my assistant or assistants. At a table, I'll show how I want each IEP goal to be targeted, and I show them how to collect data on those goals. After about a week or so of doing this as a station, I let my assistant take over and run the station, and then I oversee and answer any questions they may have. This has kind of helped a little bit too. So how does this look like? What does this really break down to? Maybe you're having a hard time visualizing it. Once my paraprofessionals feel more comfortable running the station, I really start including it in the rotation. So students will rotate from independent work to a paraprofessional. If I have 2 paraprofessionals, which is always very lucky, I may have 2 stations that go over similar tasks. So I have 2 paraprofessionals running and independent work. So at this time, I'm overseeing the entire class, answering any questions, correcting my staff as they track IEP goals if there's any errors, and prompt students on their independent work. This allows for the thorough training early in the school year to really help my staff. So I spend up to a month working through all of those kinks and supporting all of my assistants and the students as much as possible. I know it's a lot. This is only the second step. The third station you're going to add into it is maybe a technology or a hands-on learning. It could be either. So at this point, you should be at a month to a month and a half, or even maybe 2 months into the school year, right? Chaos. Your students and staff should have a clear understanding of how to rotate and participate in stations. So let's get crazy here. I use one assistant to continue with the assistant-led station, and the other students do independent work. If I have another assistant, I will pull them to teach them how to set up iPads, Chromebooks, computers, or hands-on learning activities, depending on what type of station I have. It depends on my students usually. We go through any troubleshooting errors or questions they may have. And at this time, I may also include 1 or 2 students in this process so that my assistant can see how to support those students in those types of situations and in those activities. So what do stations look like, right? Now we've added a third layer onto this. So each day I would rotate each assistant that is running the paraprofessional led station. So that kind of gives them a little bit more of opportunity. And then also rotating in with the technology or hands-on station to allow them to me to train multiple assistants in a variety of ways. I also found this time for my staff's comfortability with technology or data collection, so I kind of see that too. And I may have assistants that are intimidated by the technology or hate navigating the devices, so this might not be a station that I put them in charge of, so that's kind of another thing to think about. If you do not have any extra paraprofessionals, you can always take 10 to 15 minutes before or after school or a few days to show them your expectations for how a station should be run, and that'll help give them some pointers as well. All right, now you're going to add yourself into the mix. You're going to have a teacher-led station. So you should have 2 to 3 options for a variety of stations as well, and you are well into the school year, so you should have a clear understanding of what your students know, pretty much. This also allows for the beginning of you to explore the curriculum while the students learn the process, so you're kind of getting more of that insight. So this is when you start to come into the play here. So you can use this time for direct instruction, repetition of instruction, explicit teaching of a skill for each student, or social emotional check-ins with each student. Kind of depends on your group. And the possibilities seriously are endless. You can use your station for anything. You can also use any of the stations as a related service member to take over to get their minutes. Previously, I've had a speech pathologist that would come in from 1 to 2 p.m. every Wednesday. So I included them in the rotations for students that they needed to see. So I may remove a technology or hands-on station that day and include the SLP in that rotation. So you can kind of get creative with your schedule too on most days. So setting up stations in the classroom for teachers. Let's talk about that. What are you doing? You need to prep any materials that you need. You need to find 3 or 4 areas for your station work. You need to teach your paraprofessionals how to set up technology stations and how to troubleshoot those kind of errors. You need to train your paraprofessionals on how to run a fluency station and track IEP data. You need to train your paraprofessional on how to prompt and support independent work as well. So you also need to display student names in groups and model how to move from one location to the next when the timer goes off. You need to show students the cycle and where to go when the timer goes off, so how to move. And how should you run newly set up stations? Let's talk about this. So this is what I do for my students and for my staff. I set a 10 to 15 minute timer for each rotation, assign students together by their ability level or random groupings, sometimes it's fun both ways, and have a group of students start in an area. After the timer goes off, have students rotate to the next area. Keep rotating until the students go through all of the stations, even if it's just leisure stations. Here's what your centers might look like. So you're starting off with a teacher station, moving to paraprofessional, moving to independent work, moving to technology. You can also separate the teachings from teacher and paraprofessional. There's a way to do that too. You can start with a teacher-led station, go to independent work, then go to a paraprofessional, and then go to technology. You can kind of set it up that way too. You know what is working best for your students, so make those adjustments as you see fit. And of course, let me know if you have any questions about how to set up these centers and stations in your classroom and how to run them in. Thank you for watching today's video. If you're new here, make sure to click that like and subscribe button. It would mean so much to me. Click the bell to get notifications for when new videos get released or I go live. As always, leave a comment if you have any questions.